I've always prided myself on being rational, logical. I'm an architect by trade, a builder of structures and systems, someone whose life is defined by plans, measurements, and precision. My world is one where everything fits together, where every wall is drawn before it's built, every space accounted for. That's why what happened 3 years ago still keeps me awake at night, because no amount of logic or precision could explain the room that wasn't supposed to exist. It started with a renovation job, a fairly standard one, at least on paper. A wealthy client had purchased a sprawling, century-old Victorian house just outside the small town of Renfield. The place was massive, 4 stories, 12 bedrooms, and enough hidden passageways and quirks to keep any restoration team busy for years. My firm had been hired to modernize it, open up some walls, reinforce the foundations, and design a new wing that blended the old with the new. It wasn't the kind of project I usually took on personally anymore. But something about the house intrigued me. Maybe it was the fact that its original architect had vanished before construction was complete. Maybe it was the dozens of local legends about strange noises, sudden illnesses, and mysterious disappearances tied to the estate. I laughed those stories off, of course. Old houses always came with ghost stories. Still, I wanted to see it for myself. The first few weeks were uneventful. We surveyed the property, pulled the original blueprints from the county archive, and began mapping out the renovation plan. And that's when I noticed it. A slight inconsistency, barely perceptible. According to the original plans, the second floor measured 3,442 square feet. But our laser scan of the structure showed 3,567, 125 square feet unaccounted for. Probably a mistake, my assistant Julia said when I pointed it out. Or maybe a wall's thicker than expected. But I'd done this for too long to accept sloppy explanations. I walked the second floor over and over, measuring every hallway, every closet. Still, the numbers didn't add up. There was extra space somewhere, but I couldn't see it. The discrepancy nagged at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. One evening, long after the crew had gone home, I stayed behind with the original blueprints spread out on the dining room table. I traced each wall with my finger, comparing it to the updated digital scans on my tablet. And then I saw it. On the blueprint, the east hallway ended at the master suite. But on our scan, there was a void, a rectangular space about 10 feet wide and 12 feet long, sandwiched between 2 load-bearing walls. There was no door, no window, no access point, just a pocket of emptiness. I told myself it was probably a mistake. A crawl space, maybe, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I could feel it, a wrongness in the architecture, a void that shouldn't be there. The next day, I brought it up to the crew. "There's no way," said Miguel, our site foreman, peering over the blueprint. "We tore down the drywall in that hallway last week. Nothing behind it." "Then we missed something," I said. "We're opening that wall." They grumbled but complied. That afternoon we tore through plaster and lath, one layer at a time. Dust filled the hallway as we pried away decades of paint and wallpaper. I watched eagerly, certain we'd find a forgotten maintenance shaft or hidden closet. But when the last panel came off, there was nothing. "Just solid brick. Happy now?" Miguel asked. I stared at the brickwork, confusion turning to frustration. It was seamless, original to the house. There was no evidence it had ever been tampered with, yet the laser scan didn't lie. There was space behind that wall. For the next week, I obsessed. I spent every spare hour inspecting that section of the house, tapping on walls, scanning with ground-penetrating radar, even using a fiber optic camera through drilled pinholes. Each test confirmed the same thing. There was a void sealed away behind layers of original masonry. On the 7th night, I made a decision I now regret. I came back alone after dark with a sledgehammer. I wasn't supposed to. It violated every safety rule in the book, but I couldn't let it go. I needed to know. The house was dead silent as I crept up the staircase, my flashlight cutting thin beams through the dusty air. Every step echoed too loud, like the house was holding its breath. I reached the wall and ran my hand over the cool plaster. Then I swung the hammer. Once, twice, 3 times, brick shattered. Dust billowed. And then, hollow. The hammer broke through into darkness. I widened the hole enough to shine my light inside. My heart thudded. There it was, in a room. It was small and rectangular as the scans had suggested. The walls were bare, the floor covered in a thin layer of dust. There was no furniture, no windows, nothing. Just a single wooden chair in the center of the room, and something written on the wall behind it. It wasn't English. It wasn't even letters I recognized. Looping, jagged glyphs carved deep into the plaster. They almost seemed to twist when I looked at them too long. A wave of nausea rolled over me, and then I heard it. A faint tapping. Slow, deliberate, coming from inside the room. I spun, shining my light in every corner. Nothing. The room was empty, but the tapping continued, irregular and unsettling, like fingernails on wood. I stepped inside. The air was colder, heavy with a damp, earthy smell. My breath fogged in the beam of my flashlight. "Hello?" I called out. The tapping stopped. For a long moment, there was silence. Then from somewhere behind the wall, a whisper. So soft I almost thought I imagined it. "Don't stay." I stumbled backward, heart pounding. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then died. Darkness swallowed me whole. I fumbled for the opening I'd made, but my hands found only cold brick. My fingers scraped desperately across the wall. No hole, no way out. Panic surged. I pounded on the wall, shouting for help. But my voice was swallowed by the silence. And then the tapping started again. Closer this time. Right behind me. I spun around and my light sputtered back to life for just a second. The chair was empty no longer. Something sat there, tall, thin, its limbs too long, its face a blur of shifting features. It stared at me with eyes like pits, and when it spoke, its voice came from inside my head. "You shouldn't have opened the room." I don't remember leaving. I woke up the next morning on the hallway floor, covered in dust and blood from my scraped knuckles. The hole I'd smashed through the wall was gone, sealed, perfect, as if it had never been there. The crew found me and rushed me to the hospital. I told them I'd fallen, that I'd hit my head. They didn't question it. But when I returned to the site 2 days later, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The measurements were correct now. 442 square feet. The void was gone. I tried to forget. God knows I tried. I quit the project, turned down new jobs, even moved across the state. But I still dream of that room, of the smell, the whispers, the thing in the chair. And sometimes when I'm alone in a building, I'll hear it. That slow, deliberate tapping echoing from behind a wall. A month ago, I was asked to consult on a courthouse renovation. Brand new building. No history. Clean, modern lines, but when I scanned the second floor, 125 square feet unaccounted for. I should have trusted my gut the first time I saw that house. It wasn't just the peeling paint or the overgrown lawn, or even the fact that it had sat abandoned for nearly 40 years. It was the way it looked at me. And yes, I know that's not how houses are supposed to work. But that's the only way I can describe it. It watched me every time I drove past it on my way to work with those dark, empty windows like hollow eyes. I wasn't even supposed to go inside. I'm a home inspector, or at least I was. My job is to evaluate properties for potential buyers, point out structural issues, estimate renovation costs, and so on. I'd done hundreds of inspections over the years, and I considered myself unshakable. Mold, rot, even the occasional animal carcass. Nothing got under my skin until I met the Holloway house. The job came through a real estate agent I'd worked with before. "It's a weird one," she told me on the phone. "Big place, 3 stories, built in the 1880s. Owner's been dead for decades, but some investor group is thinking about flipping it. They want a full structural assessment before they commit." I almost turned it down. My schedule was already packed. But something about the way she said weird one hooked me. Curiosity has always been my worst trait. The house sat at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by dead trees and waist-high weeds. Up close, it looked even worse, and the porch was sagging. Shutters hung loose on rusted hinges, and ivy snaked up the cracked brick walls. The moment I stepped out of my truck, I felt it, that low buzzing dread in my chest. I told myself it was just nerves, but part of me already knew. This place was wrong. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. My boots crunched on shattered glass and debris. Every surface was coated in grime, every wall streaked with water damage. I moved room to room, jotting down notes, snapping photos, cataloging issues. It was all fairly standard for a property this old, until I got to the second floor. According to the listing, the house was 4,800 square feet. My initial walkthrough seemed to confirm that, until I checked my floor plans. Something didn't add up. The main hallway on the second floor should have extended another 15 feet beyond the master bedroom. But it didn't, it just stopped. I double-checked, measured twice. Same result, 15 feet of space, gone. I checked the blueprint provided by the county. It showed a storage room and servants' quarters in that section, but there was no door. No hallway, just a blank stretch of wall. I ran my hand along the plaster. It was cool to the touch, slightly uneven, older maybe, but nothing suggested a hidden doorway. That's when I heard it, a soft thud, then another, like footsteps. From behind the wall I froze. It was faint but distinct. Slow, deliberate steps pacing back and forth. Then silence. Then a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone talking. I should have left right then. I should have turned around, walked out, and never looked back. But I didn't. Instead, I came back the next day with a stud finder and a small hammer. The wall was hollow, not just in one spot, across the entire 15-foot section. My heart raced as I tapped gently, following the echo. There was a room back there, a big one, but sealed. I found an old door frame beneath a layer of plaster, sealed over decades ago. My hands trembled as I chipped away at it, revealing a warped wooden door behind the wall. The knob was rusted, but when I turned it, it moved. The door swung open with a low, aching groan. The room beyond was pitch black. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a small chamber, maybe 12 by 15 feet, with a single window boarded shut from the inside. At first glance, the room was empty, but as I stepped in, my boot crunched on something brittle. I looked down, bones, small ones, dozens of them. Scattered across the floor, a chill ran through me. They were animal bones and rats maybe, but they looked arranged almost deliberately, piled in small stacks like offerings. Then I saw the writing. Carved into the far wall over and over were the words, "Not a room, not a room, not a room," hundreds of times. Deep gouges in the plaster, some still stained with dried blood, and beneath the words in smaller letters, "If you're reading this, it knows you're here." The air in the room grew colder. My breath turned to mist. And then footsteps again. Behind me this time, slow, heavy. I spun around, but the doorway was empty. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded too loud, too small. Something answered, not in words. Not really. More like a vibration deep in the walls, a pulse, like the house itself was breathing. And then, a hand. It slid out from the darkness near the boarded-up window. Pale, thin, too many joints. It gripped the floorboards and pulled. Something was crawling toward me. I bolted. I don't remember how I got out. Just that I was suddenly on the lawn, gasping for air, sunlight on my face. I quit the job. Told the agent I wouldn't set foot in that place again. I didn't even invoice them. I just wanted it gone from my life. But the house wasn't done with me. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard footsteps above me, slow, deliberate, pacing. My house doesn't have an attic. The next day, I found a hairline crack in my bedroom wall. By the end of the week, the crack had widened into a fissure. I could feel cold air seeping through. When I pressed my ear to the plaster, I heard it again, whispering. Faint but unmistakable. Not a room. I called a contractor friend and begged him to check it out. He laughed, said I was paranoid, and agreed to come by the following morning. He never showed. His truck was found parked a block from my house. The keys were still in the ignition. The driver's seat was soaked in blood. Now, 3 years later, I still hear the footsteps. They move from room to room at night, always just behind the walls. Sometimes I see cracks form in places they weren't before. Sometimes I wake up to find new words carved into the plaster. The latest appeared this morning right above my bed. You opened it. Now it's building another. I don't know what that means, but I'm terrified to find out. I never believed in hauntings. Even when I was a kid, the type who devoured ghost stories by flashlight under the covers, I always assumed there was a rational explanation behind every creak, every shadow, every cold draft. I believed houses were just structures, walls and beams and insulation, nothing more. But after what happened on Willow Lane, I don't believe that anymore. I'm a surveyor for a property development company, or I was, before everything fell apart. My job was simple. Assess abandoned lots, map them, verify structural integrity, and flag anything that might be a problem before demolition or renovation. It was boring, straightforward work. That's what I liked about it. Then came the Doncaster project. It was supposed to be a slam dunk job. An old apartment building slated for demolition so a shopping complex could go up. The place had been abandoned since the early 90s. I'd done dozens like it before. I had no reason to think this one would be any different. The building was 4 stories, 1920s era construction, red brick, wrought iron balconies, boarded windows. My company had bought the whole block, and my task was to survey the interior for hazards and create a new internal layout plan for the demo team. I arrived early that morning with my assistant, Trevor. The air was cold and still, the city eerily quiet around us. As soon as we stepped inside, the smell hit us. Mold, rot, something metallic underneath. Jesus, Trevor muttered, pulling his mask tighter. Feels like this place hasn't breathed in decades. We split up, standard procedure. He took the basement and first floor while I handled the upper levels. The first 2 floors were exactly what I expected. Crumbling drywall, collapsed ceilings, rat infestations. Nothing unusual, but on the 3rd floor things started to feel off. The hallway was shorter than it should have been. According to the original floor plans, there were supposed to be 4 apartments up there. I could only find 3. I paced the corridor twice, measured it, checked my notes. The building was supposed to be 120 feet long on each floor. The hallway was only 104, 16 feet unaccounted for. I knocked on the wall at the end of the hall. Hollow, my stomach twisted. "Trevor!" I shouted down the stairwell. "You gotta see this." We spent the next hour combing over the original blueprints. Sure enough, apartment 3D was supposed to be right where the wall now stood, but there was no door, no window, nothing. It was like the space had been erased. We checked for signs of renovation. None. The plaster and paint matched the rest of the building. Even the baseboards continued seamlessly along the wall, but the floor plans didn't lie. There was a room there. We drilled a small hole and snaked a camera through. The feed came back in grainy black and white, but it was enough. There was a room, dusty, empty, sealed away from the rest of the building. "Creepy," Trevor said, trying to laugh. "Maybe they built over it by mistake." "Impossible," I said. "You don't just lose 16 feet of living space." We agreed to break through the wall. We were careful, slow, chiseling away layer by layer. The plaster crumbled easily, but the brick beneath was old, brittle, and strange. It wasn't standard masonry, and it was older, darker, almost clay-like, with symbols scratched into the mortar. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, we punched through. The wall collapsed inward, revealing the space beyond. The air that rushed out was stale and cold, smelling faintly of earth and rust. My flashlight beam swept across the room, a single bare space. Dust coated the floor in a thick layer. The wallpaper had long since peeled away, revealing blackened plaster. There was no furniture, no light fixtures, nothing except for a door. It stood on the far wall, tall, narrow, and painted a deep, flaking red. And it shouldn't have been there. There was no adjacent room, no hallway, no exterior wall behind it. That part of the building was solid brick, yet the door waited, silent and impossible. "Should we open it?" Trevor asked. I should have said no. I should have sealed the wall back up and reported it to the city. But curiosity, that same rotten, insidious curiosity that's ruined more lives than I can count, got the better of me. I turned the knob. It opened easily. The space beyond wasn't a room. It wasn't even space, not the way we understand it. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness. It was like shining light into ink. It just vanished. We stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged. The air was thick and heavy, pressing against my chest. The floor beneath our feet was hard, cold stone, but the walls, if there were walls, were too far away to see. We walked deeper. The light seemed to bend and warp, swallowed by the void. Then we found the chair. It sat alone, miles, men or inches wide from the doorway. It was old, wooden, carved with the same symbols we'd seen in the brick. And on the seat, carefully arranged, were dozens of photographs. Each one showed a person standing in a doorway. Different doorways, different eras, but always the same expression, wide-eyed terror. One of the photos showed me. I dropped it. My hands shook. Trevor swore under his breath. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. That's when the door slammed shut. The sound was deafening. a booming finality that echoed in the endless black. My flashlight flickered, then died. We ran. At least I think we did. The floor shifted beneath us, stretching and folding. I stumbled, fell, scrambled back to my feet. The door, the way out, was gone. Only darkness, and then the whispers started. Soft at first, like someone speaking behind a wall. Then louder, closer. Hundreds of voices, overlapping, whispering in a language I didn't understand. My skin crawled. My vision tunneled. Do you hear that? Trevor hissed. I turned to answer, and he was gone, just gone. I screamed his name until my throat burned. No answer. Only the whispers now shaping into words I could understand. Not meant to be found. Not meant to be opened. It builds when you look. I don't know how long I wandered. Time didn't work in that place. Minutes felt like hours. Days felt like seconds. I think I passed out at some point, because when I opened my eyes again, I was lying on the hallway floor. The wall was sealed. Perfect, untouched, like we'd never broken through. Trevor was gone. The police searched for weeks. They combed the building, the surrounding neighborhood, even the sewer system. No trace, not a single footprint. They assumed he ran. I let them, but I know where he is. I've seen him. It started in reflections, first in windows, then in mirrors. A flash of his face, twisted in terror. Then I heard his voice at night, calling from behind my bedroom wall. Sometimes when I press my ear to the plaster, I can hear the whispers again. It builds when you look. I sold my house. I quit my job. I moved across the country. But it followed me. Last month, the building inspector at my new apartment complex asked me to look at something strange. "We've got a discrepancy," he said. "Blueprint says one thing, but the measurements don't match. We're missing about 16 feet. My blood turned to ice. We walked down the hallway together. At the very end, where the wall should have been smooth and seamless, there was a faint outline beneath the paint. A rectangle,